Hello and welcome. We've got a great group here today for our webinar, and we'd love to welcome you to talking about lean portfolio management. We'll do a quick round of introductions here, and then we're going to dive right into the topic. This is going to be a pretty interactive session. We'll be looking for you to join us through some polls and share some feedback with us, both through that poll and as well in the chat as we talk about these different topics here today, so that hopefully we can help tailor this conversation to your specific environments. So let's go ahead and do these introductions. My name is Colleen Johnson. I'm an enterprise transformation coach with Agile Velocity and the CEO of prokanban.org. I've been in the software industry for a little over 20 years and got my start in QA. I find a lot of folks in the Agile industry seem to come from QA because I think we've been at the bad end of a lot of process and have a very vested interest in trying to improve it. I've worn a lot of different hats over the years as a founder, product owner, and eventually as a coach and trainer. My areas of specialty are Kanban, flow metrics, and trying to apply some of these practices outside of Agile teams. And I'm excited to be here with you all today. David?
All right. Well, I am also here today as a enterprise transformation coach. I've been involved in a fair number of transformations over more than a decade. My entry into the Agile world was very interesting. A little bit of a developer. Also was a professional animator at one point. So that was an interesting mix of Agile, which was good to see. Most recently, if you are one of those responsible for a large portfolio or responsible for coaching a large portfolio, I was you not too long ago. For about 4 or 5 years, was the portfolio coach and director for a large portfolio. So I know what you might be feeling, and I'm very happy to be here talking to you today. So with that, we are going to start out with a little bit of interaction because you can see us probably, we can't see you, but we still want to hear from you. So we are going to invite you to get set up with a quick interactive Q&A tool. It's called Slido. You may have used it before. And you can join either by, if you have a phone near you, you can just scan the QR code there. Or I think we're going to have one of us here put the link in chat. Okay, cool. Awesome. And so you can join on your browser too, if you want, or on your phone. And we have a few simple statements to see whether you agree or not. These statements are the things that that are typically hard. These are basically the symptoms that tell you that you may need to advance your lean portfolio. And we're going to ask you, is this somewhat true or is this very true in your situation? So as you get ready to log in, I'll give you a few more minutes. Now, if you want to just follow along, that's fine too. But at least we will narrate these questions and you'll see them on screen and you form an opinion on whether you agree. Is this hard for you? Is that mostly true? Is it very true that it's hard? You're going to do 5 stars. If it's only somewhat true or not true at all, if you have that portion nailed and you're not feeling that pain, that would be 1 star. Okay, cool. So with that, we're going to begin. And I'm going to give you, maybe about half a minute for each one of these questions. All right. Do you agree with this statement? Your organization has a hard time saying no to efforts or never says no at all. Let's have you start voting. Start voting. I'm going to give you a few seconds. If that is not very true, if you find it easy to say no, just put 1 star. You've got that. If you do have a hard time saying no to the efforts that you prioritize and pursue, then give it a 5. If you have a hard time saying no, let's give that a 5. Okay, everybody ready? We're going to see what results we have. Okay, pretty good correlation there. 46 said that you do, at least it must be mostly hard to say no, is what I'm reading from that. Now you can keep voting at any time. So if you're still catching up and you are still trying to get into the Slido link, you'll see that poll tab, and you can add your vote at any time. This is partly for us to know where you're at, and it's partly for you to form an opinion. Okay, next question, which Colleen will introduce.
All right, your organization approves work that doesn't advance your strategy, or your organization has not clearly defined its strategy. All right, let's take a vote on this one again. One is not a problem that you have. Maybe you do already have a very well-defined strategy that is shared across the organization, and you're confident that your work aligns to delivering against that strategy. 5 is maybe you're missing that alignment, or maybe you're missing that strategy altogether. All right. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see how I feel about this.
All
Okay.
right. Some 1s and 2s on this one. I don't think there was anyone who said they had this in a good state on the ability to say no to that new work in the last poll, but this one seems a little more distributed across all of the different scales. All right. So varying scales of strategy in place. Let's go ahead and go to the next question.
All right. The next question: your organization approves work without having the resources to support it. Okay, how often does that happen in your organization? If it never happens, that's 1. If it happens all the time, you always approve the work and then go find the resources, then that would be a 5-star situation. So how often do you approve that work without having the resources already on the ground? Okay, give you a few seconds to respond. I think you guys have a handle on the Slido interaction, so I'm really curious about this one. So let's reveal the answer. Okay, look at that. I think that's even, yeah, that's a pretty good correlation there. This is common, right? This is very common. And then what happens if you do that? We'll weave that into the story. Look at that. 5s are really catching up on that. Okay, so, and then what happens to your timelines if you don't have the resources? So your timeline is not starting if your resources are not starting. Well, your timeline is starting, but the work is not. Okay, we'll talk about some solves to that. All right, next question.
All right, your organization has trouble reliably estimating efforts in advance, including ones that take a long time.
And that it takes a long time to come up with those estimates.
Yeah, definitely. And this one's kind of near and dear to my heart. I'm excited to see the results here. I think when we think about estimating, right, it usually is a long process and requires a lot of upfront work to get the clarity required to deliver what we hope to be accurate estimates. So go ahead and take a vote on this one. 1 star is that your organization does not have trouble providing reliable estimates, 5 being that they do have trouble providing reliable estimates and that it takes a long time to get there.
I think I know what we're going to see on this one.
Yeah, pretty safe bet.
Okay, let's see. Yep, okay, yes. So estimating your work before you started it and figuring out what your slate looks like for a coming period, whether that's a year or even shorter, very hard, very hard. Okay, but a lean portfolio will help you do that. Okay, yeah. Let's move on. Your organization does not know what results are happening for what is being spent, or does not measure the effects your efforts have once they're delivered. So something is live. Are you actually measuring the business result or any result? Okay, it's in the hands of your users. Are you measuring it? Do you know what uplift you got for the amount that you spent? If you do know that, that would be a low score here. But if you do not know, that would be a 4 or 5. That was on the far end of the scale. Okay, let's see who is measuring their results. There we go. Very similar to estimation. I see 20% in the 2s though. So you're at least somewhat measuring. Okay, that's good. Okay, lean portfolio helps you continuously measure, as we'll set that for you in a bit. Next question.
All right, and your organization is AOP, or annual operating planning. Does it look different each year, but every version of it remains painful and very time consuming? So this is very similar to our conversation around estimating, right? AOP tends to be something that is a very big lift, takes a lot of pain and a lot of people to get over the finish line. So in your organization, what does AOP look like? Do you feel like this process is looking pretty simple, straightforward, not so painful? You're going to be a 1 or 2 here. If it is pretty painful, looks different every year, the process to get this done looks different every year, you'll be probably more on the 4 or 5 scale here. So let's go ahead and take a look at how these votes are.
It might look the same every year, and it's just something that people suffer through every year too. Yes. Right. I'm watching some people still voting here. So I think we've got most of our respondents here. So, okay, let's see what we got. Oh yeah. Okay.
More 4s and 5s. It's great.
Yeah.
A few 1s and 2s. So we'll talk a little bit about the AOP process and how this factors in to lean portfolio management.
Okay. And I think your answer to this question might depend a little bit on whether you are in a large organization or a small to mid organization. That might explain why some of you say, yeah, we kind of got this. But that AOP cycle is very, very hard in a large organization. Let's talk about some of the characteristics of a portfolio in a large enterprise. So, because when we say portfolio, that might mean something different to each of you. So, a large enterprise probably has multiple divisions. Each of those divisions probably has hundreds or even thousands of developers. And then often you need to work across those divisions to get any real value. Here are some of the unique challenges that you are probably feeling. Delivery timelines can be heavily influenced by shareholder announcements and expectations. If you're a public company, you're gonna need to target some results. And that means that you're gonna, all of those things that we said were hard, you're gonna need to find a way to do them. You need to at least give some idea what your quarterly plan is gonna be. Also in a large enterprise, funding is often allocated on a yearly basis. Now, you may be draining that budget through, plan resourcing and so forth over the year, but it may be your job to go out there and fight for a budget for a year and to propose a thing, and that is very hard. Also, if you're a large organization, you probably have a separate strategy and finance team, and they may be quite distant from your on-the-ground execution. How do you get those two connected? How do you go from strategy to execution? A lean portfolio will help you with that. Also, these efforts can span multiple leadership roles. You have a lot of decision makers involved in there. It's hard to get everyone on the same page. Also, architectural decisions can become unwieldy and time consuming. You probably have buy versus build decisions that you are dealing with almost all the time. And like we said before, obtaining the useful estimates can be extraordinarily painful. And even as you try to move into an agile way of doing that, it's very easy to flip back into we need to analyze everything because we need to be sure. Okay. And so we'll lay some groundwork on what you need to avoid that. Here's another thing that happens in a large organization. Your headcount and the butts and seats, the people that you have, can become that dominant currency. Okay, that is sometimes even more important than the budget and your primary constraint. And so that can yield to protection of those resources and contention of those resources. I want these people to be working on my thing. Okay, that's what we can hear. Let's talk about some other ways this looks.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about portfolio, I think for a lot of us, we tend to think of these larger organizations, right? All the things you just described, David, they are painful, they're slow, things are bigger, right? They take longer to get through that process. I think when we talk about portfolio and portfolio management, there are similar pains in small to medium-sized organizations. So it doesn't mean that you have to have these massive organizations to be able to apply or feel the pain that helps, that LPM can help with. So when we think about these mid-sized organizations, they can be as small as a few development teams, and some of the challenges for them may be slightly different. And so when I think of small organizations, what I typically start to see is that there's a lot of firefighting. And that tends to be because everybody's wearing a lot of hats. Everybody has to jump in and play a lot of different roles. And that means that they're constantly distracted and context switching. This can also mean that we are dealing with people that are very specialized. So in some of these organizations where where it's a little bit smaller, we may have very high degrees of specialization in the skill sets. And sometimes that creates bottlenecks in how we deliver value to our customers. One of the things that I think can be very common in a small to mid-sized enterprise is also how work gets prioritized tends to be a little looser, maybe. I think of HIPPO prioritization, which stands for the highest paid person's opinion, where we see a lot of shifting of what we're going to work on next based on who's really driving those requests. And a lot of times those requests circumvent any prioritization process that may be in place. These small to medium-sized organizations also have to be able to pivot to survive competition, but that can sometimes mean that they're pivoting constantly. So they're always changing direction to try to keep up with maybe some of the larger enterprises in their space. And all of this constant churn means that things rarely get over the finish line. And when they do, it often leads to longer cycle times and delivery times because we're constantly shifting gears. So slightly different challenges here between a small or medium-sized enterprise to what a large enterprise may be feeling. We'd love to hear from everybody here if you want to add into the chat. What size organization are you in? Do you feel like you're a large or small or medium enterprise? And that will help us understand what challenges you may see and if they sync up with some of the things that we've outlined here. So go ahead and add that into the chat. We'll be able to see all your responses there.
And speaking of the chat, let's drain a couple of comments that I see in there. Someone has said, I prefer people and not resources. Super good point. I've already changed that in the deck. Okay, so I prefer that too. We are all talking about people. People drive our organization. And then another question was, what do we mean by efforts? Okay, so right now, that for you, that might mean a project. Or if you are beginning your Agile journey, you might be talking about a program epic or a larger epic, or even a strategic theme that is spawning efforts and things like that. So we're staying away from that terminology for now, because that can get us very, very deep, very, very quickly. So by effort, we mean it's something that you want to get a business result. Okay. It's something that is in your slate of things that you need to accomplish to keep your business running, enter new markets, add new features, any of those things. That's what we mean by effort at this point.
Awesome. And I see a few notes on Zoom that the chat is disabled in Zoom since we're in webinar mode. But if you want to add your comments around the size of the organization or enterprise that you're in, you can do that in the Slido view. So we'll be looking at both. I know the Q&A piece is working in Zoom. You can either add your thoughts there or to Slido, and we'll see them. Everyone will be able to see them in Slido.
Yeah, you can add an answer on whether you're small or large as a question. Yeah, that'll work too. Okay, I think we're ready to move on here. Let's now, we know what the pain is. We've talked a little bit about what portfolio looks like. Hopefully, it some of you recognize these conditions in a large enterprise. Some of you might be a little bit small to medium, and you recognize those conditions. Okay, so how do we get better? Okay, why do we want a lean portfolio? We're going to drain a little bit of those major things that you need and why you need them. Okay, that's what we're going to do next. Okay, the first thing that you need that you might be missing.
All right, the first thing that you need that you might be missing here is the ability to define the ability to define the right work that will advance your strategy. And so when I think about this, what we start to see, and this can sometimes be a side effect of a transformation effort, is that our teams become very focused on productivity. We're very focused on output. What does our velocity look like? How much work are we getting out the door? And our teams may be very busy, but it might not be on the right things. And so what we want to start to look at here is making sure that our teams are working on the right things at the right time. And that means that we're all working towards the strategic goals that are outlined by our organization. Sometimes, and you saw this in the poll, the first step is going to be, what are our strategic goals, right? Do we know what we are working towards as a bigger group of teams? And how are we making progress towards those things? All of this and creating that visibility and alignment towards your strategy also helps you see when you're working on things that don't matter or aren't helping you move the needle on that strategy. So that's going to start to lead to earlier identification of noise and distractions. So starting to be able to say, is something coming to our teams that we should say no to, or not yet, at least. And at the end of the day, I think one of the most important parts around this alignment to strategy is that working towards these common goals, whether it's in a team or team of teams, is going to start to drive greater employee engagement, right? We're going to be excited about the things that we're working on together instead of feeling like it's a death by 1,000 requests from all of these different things and not really understanding how we're moving the needle toward those bigger objectives that our organization might have.
Now, I am looking at both chats here, and all the responses that I see, some of you are coming from very large places, quite large places, actually, it looks like. And so we recognize we're doing work in places that big, and the picture that we have here of the people rowing, the version of that we're probably talking about is a bunch of cruise ships, right? It is a huge effort trying to keep cruise ships aligned, and that's probably what you're feeling, okay? Because they're hard to steer, quite large. Yeah, it's hard to steer, and it's hard to keep everyone moving in the right direction, and it takes a lot of communication, but you can't have 2,000 people all communicating to each other. And so we're talking about a scaled portfolio here. At this point, for those of you that are that large, we are definitely talking about some scaling frameworks there and some actual lean portfolio management techniques that you will need. Okay, it's more than 10 people in a boat, right? Okay, ready for the next? Okay, so okay, what you will need, and you might be missing, is the ability to measure your unique capacity footprint. So even in a large organization, you do have finite resources. What are the distinct skill sets in your organization? I'm talking about a front-end developer is different than a back-end developer. A person who can work on iOS is actually a different person than can work on Android. Those skill sets are not fungible, okay? You might have someone who is an expert in, tax methods and in accounting systems that you're modifying. That is what we mean by a skill set. In normal scale Agile, we talk about trying to cross-train, but in a large organization, we know that that is not always possible or reasonable. So it is important for you to determine and define your unique skill sets and how much of them you have. You might have multiple skill sets on a single team. If you have set up some cross-functional stack teams, you might have 2 or 3 skill sets on a team. And then you might have another team right next to it who has those same skill sets. So you're not talking about sending work cleanly into a team, okay? You need to scale this. And these skill sets may be spread across multiple teams. They might be even spread across multiple divisions. The question for you is, how much capacity do you have? Kind of like those vegetables, canned vegetables on the shelf there. Where is, how much of this do you have and how much of that do you have? Because if you don't measure that, you're not going to send the work correctly, and you'll run into some bottlenecks. Also, do you have a hiring plan or a ramp plan for those in-demand skill sets? Some of these things can spin up very quickly, and we've already answered that. It's a common that you get something approved and you don't have that development capacity. Okay, so measuring this is very important in a lean portfolio. Okay, there's another side to that.
Yes, the demand, right? So we have to look at both our capacity and our demand. So one thing that you're going to need that you might be missing is the ability to measure your demand footprint for each effort. And so just like Dave just said, this means understanding what's going to be required from a skill set perspective and where that's going to come from in the organization. And we want to start thinking about how do we start to match that up, right? And so it might mean that our priorities shift a little bit as new demand comes in based on what capacity we have in the organization. So we may see that in your example that, our top 3 priorities are iOS related features, but our team that's available to pull work is an Android team. So we need to understand both the capacity and capabilities of our teams and the demand that we have of the work coming in so that we can start to match those things up. The other thing we want to look at is how much, right? So how much work is coming to these teams? One of our questions here at the beginning was, are you planning or starting work without understanding who's going to be available, or if you even have people available to deliver it? It's a super common pattern in organizations of all size. And so what we want to start to think about is, are we bringing work to the teams at the right pace that they're able to pull that work through the system? And that's where we start to look at how we balance that capacity and demand together.
Yeah, and I like this last bullet especially because this happens a lot. Do the people you need even know that they're needed for those efforts? That's a very, very hard problem to solve in a large enterprise. Just to talk about a couple patterns that I've seen work really well is something called a portfolio walk, where you explain all of the things that you're trying to accomplish, and you're broadcasting it, kind of like this webinar. And at that point, you're saying, hey, I need this and I need that. And you have the teams in the audience and they're like, oh, you called my name, or you didn't call my name, but I know that you need me. Okay, so you need a mechanism to get people attached. Okay, this is also on that demand footprint side of things. Some places call that speed sizing or speed dating. And that's a really fantastic pattern. And it's fun and healthy to hear what you're going to accomplish for the year. Someone just posted, I don't even know what our strategy is. Well, it's really, really great if you are broadcasting a large scale portfolio walk, walking through all the items in your portfolio, and everyone is listening. Okay, webinar style is a really, really good pattern. You need to get those hidden contributions exposed as early as possible, because we've all been surprised. Either if you're someone who needs something, I know that you have gone to teams and you're like, well, I need you. And they're like, well, oh, I didn't know that. And then if you're on the team side, if you are, fulfilling, into the efforts, it's not fun to be surprised at the very last minute, and then it's got to get into your intake, right? So when we're talking about scaling the portfolio, we're talking about scaling that visibility. All right. I think let's spend a little more time talking about matching the capacity to your demand, because that is very, very, very hard. And it's something that AOP tries to accomplish and, might work for about 10 minutes, then it's all out of whack again. So what you may be missing is the ability to balance the amount of work that you're actually accepting to the actual skill set capacity of your teams. Remember how we talked about the actual skill sets? So this is so important that we put it in bold. Your work in progress needs to be a specific match to your organization's individual available skill sets. Okay, this is where Colleen was saying, beginning to dive into that work in progress, it's not all fungible. You say, okay, we'll do this one big effort, it fits. You say, let's do the second big effort. Well, it also fits, but it's lighting up different skill sets. You pull that next priority item in, you may have overloaded a particular skill set. So you can't do that one. You have to move down your list of priority. So it's not a simple priority, and it's not simple number of things in progress. You have a spectrum that gets, activates different skill sets differently when you decide to do it. Now, you need that visibility both for your initial planning, but also it changes and varies at any time, and especially at least at a quarterly basis, you might decide, oh, we don't need to do so much of that. We want to do more of this. Well, that changes your skill set load right there. So this is not a one-time visibility. You need continuous visibility. on what areas of capacity are being lit up. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about what you need to do that. A lot of these topics are very deep topics, though. So you need to understand this because this will illuminate your true bottlenecks. Okay, and in those bottlenecks, that's where you should activate your scaling plan, your people scaling plan. And what can you do about those bottlenecks to increase throughput? Maybe there's a team elsewhere that is underloaded, but they have that skill set. Let's send some of the work to them. We don't need to reform. We'll just send the work their way. As long as we have visibility over the entire portfolio, we can do that.
I was going to add another example here that I think we can relate to sometimes around where we see capacity and demand that is not matched, right? Where if you've ever landed at an airport and you've landed on the runway and they've said, oh, we're going to have to sit on the tarmac a bit longer, there's no gate for us to pull up to, right? All of a sudden, the capacity the airport has, they have a limited number of gates for us to pull up to. And now all of a sudden the demand on those gates has outstripped the capacity that the airport has to meet that. And if we take that a step further, there's probably certain size gates that aren't going to work for maybe a plane coming from London or a jet coming from Telluride, right? And so when we start to think about why these things matter, what we don't want is all of the planes stuck on the tarmac with no gate to pull up to. And so this is where starting to balance this capacity and demand becomes really important. And we want to do it before we end up with that backlog on our runway.
Yeah, I'm going to extend that even just a little bit further because we are working with some major airlines right now. And an analogy that we're using to help share the work across the portfolio looks a little bit like, planning where you want the planes to be. If you talk February, okay, let's say you have, 10 planes in New Orleans and 10 planes in Chicago. Okay, and those are strictly allocated, which is the way a lot of portfolios are. These planes are for Chicago. These planes are for New Orleans. Well, guess what happens in February? No one wants to go to Chicago in February, right? So they're just going to sit there, right? But everyone wants to go to Mardi Gras. Okay, so what you really need is 20 planes in New Orleans, and you don't need so many planes in Chicago. So that is a good analogy for shifting the work to what effort is most important rather than protecting them. Okay. Let's keep going. We have a couple more things that you might be missing.
All right, our next one here is a multi-stage mechanism to clearly prioritize your efforts. And so I mentioned at the beginning, what we're looking for here is a safe way to say no. One of the things that allows the most work to creep in, whether we're talking about a team, a program, or a portfolio, is that we say yes to everything. And there's a lot of reasons why that might be true. And it's not that we're trying to overload the system or slow things down. Often we're just trying to help get that work through to our customers. So having a clear way in your portfolio to say no to work or not yet becomes really important here. I like to think of this process here around understanding how work moves through our system a little bit about Thanksgiving morning. And so if you've ever been responsible for cooking your Thanksgiving dinner, you may get up at 5 or 6 in the morning to put your turkey in, right? It's typically the star of the show. And if you live in a small old house like I do, I have one oven, not two. And so I have to be really thoughtful about how I prioritize the things that are going to require the oven. Now that's going to change, right? If something goes wrong or something changes. So if the turkey's taking longer, right, that might mean that what I cook next is going to shift. I might need to pull in a toaster oven to help cook a pie because the turkey's 2 hours longer than I thought it was going to be. And so what we want to start to do here is look at what data do we have coming back to us that's going to help us make decisions about what we need to work on next. And so in that example, I might be looking at the thermometer here on my turkey going, oh no, this thing's going to run in the oven right up till the finish line. I'm going to start microwaving some dinner rolls, right? I'm going to shift, right, the order of priority of what I'm going to work on next. And so what we want to do is make that really clear and visible and have data available that's going to help us drive those conversations around what our priorities are and if they need to change.
And a thing that fits perfectly on that turkey analogy is we didn't want to throw a lot of terms at you in a 1-hour webinar, but there's a cost of delaying starting that turkey, right? That's the cost of delay. You need to start it first, even though it's going to take a long time. That's the thing. Okay. And that plays out in your cost of delay for that effort. There's a very high penalty for not getting the turkey done. You don't get to eat it and everyone is waiting. So that the using, some mechanisms, I'll just mention it. Some of you probably know Gipp is a way for you to figure out your long poles. Okay. And the turkey would be a long pole. Okay. It's big effort, definitely worth doing. Right. And both of those factors combined. Another thing that might be happening to you in terms of cost of delay is a fixed deadline. If you have a product, I had a product once that supported the Olympics. Well, guess what? The date of the Olympics is not going to change. So that is a fixed date. The cost of missing that is extraordinarily high. That's almost an infinite cost of delay. You have got to start that before anything else. That's what we mean by leveraging the data to make decisions about what to pull next. Now, there's a lot of specific techniques on how to do that. And we'll get to some of those. We'll get to mentioning those terms a little bit. We won't have time to go super deep with you all here today, but we'll get you started. Next, I think. Okay, and so now also what you may be missing is this continuous practice to measure your results. So what the idea is you're best served leveraging that past performance to prioritize your future efforts. Okay, we want to be responsive. In fact, we're better if we're responsive. If we don't change anything over a year, that's probably not a good thing. That's probably a bad thing. So what we want to be doing is we want to measure every little value that we can get out there, and not only measure it, but we use it to say, should we do more of this or should we do less of this? This is our persevere or pivot decision that you should be doing on your efforts. Do we keep going? Okay. Is there more value to be extracted? What sort of work would extract that value? You don't want to define that too far in advance. That's where we get into the strategic themes, and the OKRs, objectives and key results, are some of those metrics that will help you target exactly the right work. Okay. Now that's true whether you're delivering to a actual public customer or an internal stakeholder. You can use that either way. There's going to be both quantitative and qualitative metrics here. Yeah, some of it's going to be feels right, and some of it is going to be we can prove it because cost savings or increased revenue or things like that. Now you need regular opportunities to review that data. Okay, you need a scaled portfolio process so that you can do that. And you don't want to do that with a myopic view of each portfolio area. You want to do it as a whole, because you may need to shift people from one effort to another. It's really important to have a portfolio that scales all the way up. Okay, otherwise you may be doing work over here that's less important. Okay, you want to do it in a cohesive way. Okay, I think we're doing pretty good. I think now we're going to give you some specific things to look into. We're going to whet your appetite a little bit on what you need. Okay.
All right. And you'll see here, it's not a short list or an easy list. This could probably be, each of these bullets could probably be a whole nother hour in and of themselves. But as somebody said in the chat, I don't even know what our strategy is. Well, that's probably the first thing you're going to need, right? You're going to need some strategic themes that are going to help you drive these conversations and help you drive this decision making. And so starting to understand what are the themes that we're working toward, What are the metrics that are going to help us know when we've achieved those? And how are we going to fund those things? Those three things really need to be the starting point for you. And then you're going to need portfolio Kanban. This is really the way that work moves through the system, and it may be different if you're a small organization, or I think we saw some government organizations in the chat, places that were 100,000 plus employees. Your portfolio Kanban process may look slightly different, but what that's going to do is start to bring some visibility into how the work moves and the current state of each of those different initiatives or epics that are moving through your board. You want to be able to have some way to talk about the scope of the work. And so thinking about how you're going to look at how big is this epic? How long is it going to take us to get to start to break this epic down into features and start to get things into our customers' hands? And so you want to be able to do that without all of that upfront planning that we talked about at the very beginning, right? That's going to slow things down and make it really difficult to have the conversations and actually start the work. You also want to be able to have a value-based model of your products. And so this is really starting to think a little bit more about how we validate or vet our ideas. And that can be part of can be and should be part of your portfolio Kanban process, right? What does our discovery process look like to be sure that we're delivering the right things that our customers want? We also have collaborative budgeting sessions, typically at a half year or yearly intervals. And that may sound scary to you if that feels more frequent than what you're doing right now. But really our goal here is that we're having that conversation a lot more often because the work is moving faster. And then evidence-based roadmaps that are adjustable, right? So we've talked a little bit here about how these things need to be flexible. We need to be able to look at data that's helping us decide what to pull based on the data that we're collecting. So think of this as one giant feedback loop. We're putting things out, we're delivering things to our users, we're getting feedback on those things, and we're using that evidence to help us pick what to work on next. And lastly, business outcomes here that can be measured using leading indicator metrics. And so we tend to have very broad and vague business outcomes. And so as we start to think about these things, we want to try to be as specific as possible and make sure that we have leading indicators baked into those outcomes so we know that we're on the right track and that we're pursuing the right goals for our organization.
So I'm gonna recap a little bit and drain a question. A very interesting question I see there is, what are some key LPM metrics? Now, some of these metrics and the leading indicators and the outcomes that you should be tracking will be specific to each piece of work. Okay, you will need to know what you're intending to do with that piece of work and what the uplift is. And so that's a different set of metrics that's specific to each thing. But I'll try to answer generically that question. What are some key LPM metrics? A lot of people say, if you're going to measure one thing, measure cost of delay. And I kind of agree with that. So cost of delay is a huge key LPM metric. Now, in order to make that meaningful, you're going to need to know the size, the effort. Okay, you need at least those two things. If you don't have those two things, you're not going to find the turkey that you need to start early, right? Now, in addition to that, you've got some things that help you measure the flow. You probably should be measuring your cycle time and your lead time, both at the quarterly level and at the yearly level. It's less important at the yearly level because what happens with each, let's beginning to use some real terms, let's call it a business case or an epic, is you might not need to do all of the work. Okay, the value delivery curve is going to look like this. And then near the end, it's going to taper off. And then you're going to have a question, should we finish or should we move to the next thing? Okay, so cycle time on your individual value drops, very important, and lead time. But you want to measure something different on that epic, and that is the epic delivery curve. Okay, and earned business value is one way to do that, just to throw some terms at you. Okay, I think we will have some time for some Q&A, but we've got another big topic to talk about here. This is only a small list of the things that you're going to need to get done. And like the guy on the treadmill there, it's hard work. It is hard work. And so you need a way to know that that hard work is paying off on your transformation. So the question is, how do we measure that we're actually changing our state of our portfolio? How do we measure that we're getting more fluent? It's a different thing than how do we measure an individual piece of work. Okay, we need to measure our transformation as well. You need to measure the health of and fluency of your portfolio. So we need to do that. You know, we are, Colleen and I and our peers, we are out in organizations, you know, every day answering that question, and we will tell you how we do it. We use a tool. We use a tool called Path to Agility. And what is very often happens is that you may know that you need to up-level your lean portfolio, but in order to get there, you need to have a healthy team of teams, and you need to have healthy teams also. And so that what you need in order to get a better result may go all the way down to the people in the teams. And so just measuring what's happening at the portfolio transformation is often not enough. And you will go through several stages probably on getting to that result. Some of you may be just starting. You're in the align or the learn stage. And some of you might have been through a couple transformations. Maybe you're already to the predict stage, or maybe you're even beginning to accelerate. But what also can happen is you might be clicking back. Maybe in one particular area, maybe at the system level, you're way back in a line. Okay. Oh, we have a P2A fan in the audience. Yay. Okay. We promised we didn't send a ringer in the audience, but you need a way to measure your transformation performance. This is what we use. Okay. And it's not just for us. We built this for you. Anyone can do this, whether you have an active engagement with us or not. So keep that in mind, that this is a very good tool for you to use and measure progress at all levels of your transformation, including that LPM level, all the way down to the team level. And to do that continuously. This is a continuous measuring tool. It's not a one-time survey. It'll tell you where you're doing well, and then you're all of a sudden not doing well, and what should you do to keep that progress going. Of course, we are here to help you. If you want our help getting farther along on your fluency stages, of course, we're here to help. But don't forget that this tool is available. Okay, another P2A practitioner. Okay, yeah, and we're continuing to develop that tool. So it's not done yet. In fact, we're adding more useful portfolio level things. Portfolio level things is what many of you need, given the number of folks that you say that you have in your organization. That is quite a lot. Now, yeah, let's go a little bit further, because you need to get this rolling somehow, or unblock it if you've already tried. Here's some thoughts on that.
Yeah. So where should you start? So we gave you this very long list of all the things that you'll need to start to build out your lean portfolio. And there's a couple things that are really critical for you to consider before you jump right in. Who are going to be the required players for you, and are they on board? This is so fundamental to getting started. And so what we see with a lot of organizations is that things get stuck pretty quickly when maybe the folks that you need to be part of your LPM group are either not on board or don't understand what the goal or purpose of lean portfolio management is. They may feel the pain, but not understand that this is a potential solution. And so they need to have some skin in the game. I think getting really, really familiar with what their pain is for their particular part of the organization, so you can help them see how this may be a solution, is a great place to start. We also want our leaders to know what success looks like. And so that means using something like P2A, or making sure that they're very clear that where you're going next and what you hope for that to look like. What does good look like? The next topic here is finance on board. Again, another bullet that could be a whole nother hour of conversation, but one of the places that LPM can stall pretty quickly is if you don't have the finance team on board. They need to be willing to engage in this process and understand that how they fund work now may look different after LPM is in place. A lot of organizations are really used to traditional funding models where we fund based off of a project, based off the number of people on that project, and based off that estimate that we tried to make at the beginning that maybe took us 3 months to get. And this shifts a lot of that to be really focused more on funding at the strategic theme level. And lastly, what does the work hierarchy look like? And so we've been talking pretty abstract here about things like epics, projects, but one of the other core elements of LPM is understanding how your work breaks down and how it moves. So how does something move from idea to funded to delivered, right? And so getting really clear on how the work moves, what are the work items, and how is that going to start to break down? And it might look different in an organization with 50,000 people than with 500,000 people. Sometimes the tools dictate a little bit of what this work hierarchy looks like. Other times it may be unique to different parts of the organization. And so getting some consistency and alignment is going to be really critical to be able to make your LPM successful.
I particularly like that finance question because it's so important. And, don't feel discouraged because very often, even the financial folks want a better way to do it. So it's partly explaining the model, and it's partly explaining that there is a model and that there is a way to do this differently. That's the first part of starting that conversation. A lot of times people are just not aware that, Agile, scaled Agile can even handle this. Okay, but it can, okay, through some of those things like strategic themes, your, well-defined business cases, checking in to make sure that you're spending money on the right efforts. What finance person would not agree with that? Okay, everyone wants that. Okay, well, we are in the last 5 minutes. It is time to start generating some questions, should you have any. We may not have time in 5 minutes to answer them all, but we will capture them, and maybe we'll find a way to get back to you. Here are some options for asking questions. You can use that Slido QA tab. Some of you are using that. You can use a Zoom chat. Some of you are using that. We're in a webinar, so you really can't raise your Zoom hands, but use any of those two question asking methods. And of course, the other way to ask a question is to reach out to us. We're always super happy to talk. We know that that we couldn't answer everything within an hour. We hope we've whetted your appetite. Let's see if we can train a couple questions. Where might I go to learn about funding models in the conversation with finance? I would start with something called collaborative budgeting or participatory budgeting. You can look that up. There's a fantastic book called Beyond Budgeting. And you can also head towards some of the defined frameworks. Now, we've avoided mentioning them to this point, but if you were to go to the Scaled Agile website and type in participatory budgeting, you would get an idea of what the new way of budgeting looks like. Okay, that's a place to start. Very good question, though. That is often the thing that holds up your lean portfolio. You can ask us. We're happy to talk. We are. Any more questions? We've got 4 minutes. Okay. Well, as we wrap up, we're very happy that you spent some time with us. We care deeply about this topic. We care deeply about making the world of large-scale efforts easier for everyone. We really do. I work in a very traditional company that is resisting change. Where should I start? Okay. You can start by finding the leaders that are more supportive than others. Okay. There's something to be said with growing what you love, not fighting what you hate, sort of thing. And so find people that are supportive and form a cohort with them. You can start by telling some examples. We actually have some white papers, which are very useful for starting that conversation. There are other white papers out there on the web as well for how to get started in resisting that change. Sometimes telling those success stories are a way to open that resistance. Also, pointing out that companies who pivot are the ones that survive. Okay, that is a very attention-grabbing way to help mitigate that resistance. Okay, we do want to change. The people that are the companies that are more able to adapt quickly are the ones that are going to recover the quickest and advance the quickest as well. So what is the side effect of not changing? What is the side effect of your resistance? Sometimes painting a picture of what will happen if you don't and what the future will look like if you do, and comparing them and saying, which one do you want? Okay. Yeah, I hope you feel a little encouraged that there is a way through this. That's what we wanted to leave you with. Okay, there's some white papers here that Rachel is posting in there for you. Okay.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. And like Dave said, if you have any questions, reach out to us directly on LinkedIn or through the Agile Velocity website that you see here. We'd be happy to continue the conversation with you.